long before Johannesburg, at the base of those hills, there was an African city that flourished about 200 years ago. Those hills on the horizon that you're seeing, that's the Sekopasrand Hills, and that's only about an hour's drive south of here. I'd like to tell you about this city and about how we discovered it, but to put it into context, let me first take you back to Cape Town in the year 1801. On the 1st of October 1801, the governor of the Cape dispatched a trade expedition to go to the north, to go far beyond the colony's frontiers. And after 2 months of hard trekking, that expedition reached a settlement called Leetakoo, which is about 400 kilometers to the west of us in that direction. Now, Leetakoo turned out to be the capital of the Batlhaping kingdom of the Batswana nation. And the European travelers tried to estimate the size of this place, and they had a hard time because it was so big they couldn't see the whole thing. But they estimated something at the low end about 7,500 people, and at the upper end they estimated about 24,000 people living there. Some of them thought Leetakoo was bigger than Cape Town was at that time. Then, in the next 2 decades, a number of other expeditions went that way and revisited Leetakoo, and they visited other such capitals of neighboring Tswana kingdoms. And they were clearly impressed by the scale and organization of these places. Some of them used words like cities and civilizations, city-states, metropoli, in their travelogues and journals in writing about these places. So now, thanks to a new technology, we've discovered another one of these Tswana capitals right here, right next to Johannesburg. And before I tell you about this city, let me tell you something about the technology behind the discovery. So the technique we used is referred to as airborne laser scanning, or LiDAR. And as the name implies or suggests, it's an airborne system. Airplane flies over the targeted area, and with a laser scanning machine, it basically bombards the landscape with billions and billions of pulses of laser light. And each of those pulses of laser light, as soon as it hits a solid object, it's reflected back to the scanning machine, which then records the position of that interception in 3 dimensions. Back at base, the data is downloaded and then projected as a point cloud, and creating this wonderful 3-dimensional pointillist view of the landscape. And us archaeologists, we're not so interested in the birds and the telephone wires and the trees and the leaves that were intercepted, so the technicians delete all of that stuff for us and leave only what we call the last return. That's the pulses of light that went farthest and reached bare ground before they came back to the machine. They're the red ones and the orange ones in this diagram. Then the technicians take these last returns and they stitch them together to create something like this, which we call a digital elevation model. It's a kind of a lunar landscape with all the vegetation taken out, and those circular shapes that you see in that image, those are the building blocks of this city that I'll tell you about. These are compounds or homesteads of the people that live there, and the size of the compound depends on how wealthy the head of that homestead was. The more wealthy, the more wives, the larger the family, the more houses inside of the compound, and so the larger the homestead. Now, 200 years ago, we think this is more or less what those homesteads and compounds would have looked like. The mud-walled and thatched roofed houses have decayed a long time ago. But what's left now are just the stone walls, which are the fences demarcating spaces in those settlements. And at ground level, this is what you see. You see some stone walls close to you, but the rest of it is hidden by grass and shrubs and dense vegetation. That's Fern, a fourth-year student who did a research project on the architectural details of one of these homesteads. She's standing in the middle of the compound and in the center of this city, and you can't tell. It's just covered up and very, very difficult to see, to get an impression of the size and shape of it. But besides the stone walls, there are several other very interesting architectural features in this city, and I'll describe just 3 of them. So what you're seeing there in the center of the image, that yellow mound, is a 7-meter tall heap of ash composed of cattle dung, burned cattle dung ash, masses of animal bones, mostly cattle, and lots of broken ceramic pots. Now these are accumulated debris of many a feast that were thrown by the head of the homestead to celebrate special occasions, for rituals, marriages, to welcome VIPs. As we heard earlier, cattle beef was not daily food. Cattle were slaughtered for very special occasions. And to have a 7-meter tall mound of slaughtered cattle gives you an indication how wealthy and generous the head of that homestead was. So in the built environment of this city, we can see hundreds of these ash heaps, and the size and monumentality of them tell us where the wealthy and generous people in that city lived. Another thing that we see are these stone towers. That's witness a PhD student standing next to one for scale, and these solid core stone towers or platforms are generally about 2.5 meters tall and maybe 4 or 5 meters in diameter. And we think they were bases for grain bins, very large grain bins to store the annual harvest. And again, the size and the numbers of these platforms tell us about the wealth of that homestead. And then as a third example are kilometers of lined lanes, passageways marked in the landscape, which were there to direct the cattle in and out of the city. In 1801, the European visitors to Leetakoo mentioned that the high point of the day was at sunset, when the cows came home. And everybody would go and line up and watch the wealth of the nation coming back to the settlement. And the proud owners will get up and sing the praises of their favorite cattle, a spectacle every day of the year. And here in this city, there were highways built for that purpose. Now, the descendants of the people that built this city elected to name it Kweneng. And Kweneng in the Tswana language means the place of the crocodile. And the crocodile is a totemic animal of the Batswana people and the Batlhaping people, who were, according to oral histories, living in this area 200, 300 years ago. Was Kweneng a city? Well, it's 10 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide. It has over 800 of these compounds and homesteads, hundreds of those stone platforms, hundreds of those ash middens, ash heaps, kilometers of those roadways. So certainly in terms of scale, it fits the bill. And aside from that, it's also clearly where the powerful, the wealthy people live, where the royalty stayed, and it provided administrative support services to the countryside around it. It's the largest site of that type in this area. The next one, the next Tswana capital that we know of, is around Rustenburg. But Kweneng did not appear overnight. In the late 16th century, in the late 15th, 16th, and into the early 17th century, homesteads were scattered throughout the Sekabosrand Hills, but very dispersed. And then in the next phase, from about the mid-17th century to the mid-18th century, there was a move towards the northern foothills and an aggregation of the population into villages. And then in the next phase, that's when the Kweneng city aggregates, comes together from about the mid-18th century to the early 19th century, when we can see it 10 kilometers along the western foothills of the sacred Botswana Hills. Then in the 1820s, it all came to an end. The glory days of Kweneng were finished when the Defekano, or the civil wars of the 1820s, engulfed the interior of southern Africa. And the Matabele passed through here and sacked the city. The king Zelikazi set up his capital a couple of dozen kilometers to the east of Kweneng. And we believe that probably most of the people living at Kweneng became refugees, went further west to join other Tswana kingdoms, other Tswana capitals. We know that some people stayed behind and became subjects of King Zelikazi, but Kweneng as an independent polity, as a city, was no more. A lot of it was simply burned down. Well, there's a lot of work still to be done. This is a very broad brush stroke introduction to the site. There's decades of work to be done to find out the details of exactly what happened when, how many people lived there, and so on. But the people, the descendants of the people that built Kweneng, they're still here. The Batswana community is still around. And Kweneng, the ruins, at the very least, show us that this was no empty land when the Europeans first arrived here. Thank you for your kind attention.